You need to do endurance training as a boulderer.
Done.
In this video, I once again ask our Jason-Dan duo to rate and explain controversial and misunderstood topics in climbing. Fair warning, there may be shots fired. And the first topic is core strength training.
Ooh.
The amount of training and or the intensity of the training doesn't really translate to on-the-wall success as much as people like to think it is. That doesn't mean I don't think it's important for many categories of general health or fitness. I just definitely think it's overrated for climbing performance.
Yeah, I think in reality, like, a strong core is essential. It's just that the exercises that tend to correlate with that for people don't work super well, and it's sort of just a catch-all for frequently either bad technique or weakness in other areas.
Make sure you keep your core engaged.
If somebody says, keep your core engaged one more time.
All right, next one is antagonist training for rock climbers.
I have just like a general issue with calling it antagonist training for climbing because these muscles are extremely useful. So like in that sense, antagonist training is completely underrated because they're absolutely essential for climbing performance. But thinking like just the specific antagonist training are gonna solve your like injury woes is completely overrated.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. I think the amount that antagonist work is used for injury prevention or rehab is not always inappropriate, but is mostly overrated. But the amount that most climbers do, honestly, push training specifically in any kind of like regimented, overloaded kind of way, as opposed to like, man, I ought to do some push-ups from time to time, probably underrated.
The next topic is the interference effect.
Ooh, okay.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Right?
A, more and more evidence seems to suggest it may not exist at all. B, to the best of my knowledge, it's never been demonstrated in upper body athletes. C, in rock climbing, we basically don't do anything that looks like high intensity aerobic exercise, so it's essentially irrelevant anyways.
A lot of this came from an older-ish study with a small population size that basically they showed the interference effect because it turns out their participants were in a calorie deficit because they were doing too much training with the twice a day regimen that they were doing. So it seemed like there was an interference effect because they were not getting the resources they need to recover from the exercise.
Yeah, it turns out if you smash somebody directly into overtraining, like...
Yeah, you need to have calories to make up for it.
All right, well, I'm gonna follow that right up with cardio for climbers.
Ew.
We disagree.
I feel like we probably agree and use different colors.
I'm gonna say we're probably gonna be on the similar page. Like the reason I say overrated is only because people think that if they can just run a really quick mile, they're gonna be a better climber. Like they attribute cardio to too much climbing success. That's not to say that having decent cardio is not generally good for like your well-being, your health, and even some like climbing performance. Yeah. But just they take it too far.
Yeah, and that's unsurprisingly kind of where I land on it. I think climbers hate cardio. I'm certainly kind of on that boat. No one wants to run or any of that.
Oh my God. I can't.
So against the backdrop of people never doing any ever, I think it's pretty underrated. It probably supports a variety of overall health, which probably supports athleticism to a degree. In reasonable doses, there's no way that it's going to undermine the rest of your training. And certainly you'll find on longer routes or when you're climbing faster or on like very steep, powerful kind of wrestly roof boulders, like you'll frequently end up somewhat winded. And just improved cardio health will probably help with that.
If you're doing it, just make sure you're eating enough calories to make up for all your training.
Rest day jogs, probably not a bad idea, but let's not get crazy.
Concentric finger strength training.
I guess I don't hear it talked about that much, so it's hard to say that it's like way overrated.
Okay, well here's the setup.
Oh, okay.
People are always asking, well, we like to do concentrics for all our other strength training, so why are we only doing isometrics for finger strength training?
Oh, mostly convenience.
That's tough because like to do a pure like concentric for your finger would involve you like somehow curling the weight, and then, in my opinion, having to set the weight back down and not doing the eccentric, because while I'm not saying this is an absolute, like if you're doing really heavy training in a concentric and doing the eccentric, you do get friction on your pulley, which not only can increase the damage on the pulley itself, but even maybe if you had like a tiny case of like flexor tenosynovitis flaring up, that friction is only gonna make that worse. So if you're doing heavy concentric training, I view it as more a negative than a positive, just from like a biomechanics perspective.
That's fair. It's dissimilar to climbing, and it's frequently just not as comfortable or available, and it's harder to overload. So you kind of trade away the benefits of specificity without a clear advantage to replace it, and possibly some downsides.
Yeah. If you want to do that, as an alternate, I'd say maybe try it with BFR, because then you can use like a lower load, so there's less intensity, but you might still get the cumulative effect of the concentric.
Yeah.
So that would take away the downside and give you the potential upside.
Yeah. You could do it just kind of in higher rep ranges too, with something of a bias towards like control and hypertrophy, and that would potentially support kind of like higher intensity training on fingerboards and things like that.
Yeah.
But I would probably not do concentric finger training as like a high intensity or like max strength intervention.
The next topic is recruitment pulls.
You know, so we're actually looking into this for a future video, and the more I look into it, the more questions I have. So we'll definitely be able to answer this in way more details, probably too many, in an upcoming video. So be sure to check that out. But yeah, research to be done.
Endurance training for boulderers. Dan is very psyched.
Dan, take the psych.
You need to do endurance training as a boulderer.
Done.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, kind of for real. Like, that's got to be towards the top of my list of like mistakes made in the first half of my climbing career. Like, yeah, if you're not strong enough, there's nothing to endure, sure. But like, if you actually want to send climbs, you need a pretty fat base of power endurance. Endurance is a very useful way to kind of backfill and finish out sessions. It helps sort of tangentially increase work capacity. It gives you like an implicit way to improve flow and climbing quality, especially when you're fatigued, which necessarily involves sort of improving technique, assuming that you pay attention to that. Like, there are so many benefits to endurance training, period, but yeah, especially for boulders where it's like grossly neglected. And I would say kind of the same thing for bouldering for rope climbers, but if you have time, basically all boulders should do some endurance training.
Face pulls for climbers.
Ooh.
Ooh! All right.
Only because it's not possible to have face pulls be overrated.
Yeah, seriously. It's a very efficient exercise. It targets really important muscles for rock climbers. I still don't see it used enough, even though I swear, like, not only do we talk about it a lot, but there are other like fitness influencers who talk about it. But it just targets like your rotator cuff, your mid and lower trap, and it's functional for climbing.
Yeah. I think an extra thing that doesn't come up that often is typically when you're climbing in sort of like either bound or mid ranges, you're kind of like leading with your elbows, you're kind of squeezing things, you're staying in this kind of plane. But anytime you're on a steep angle or have bad or slopey feet, the way that you kind of like shift down to load those feet is exactly a face pull. And so just as a cueing mechanism, that's really useful for people. You don't, especially in like modern gyms, feet tend to be pretty big, and so you don't always have the opportunity to like crank in and load on feet, and this is like a pretty good simulation of that.
Training periodization.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I guess for more elite athletes, especially people with specific competition dates and things like that, long-term planning is important, and for most people who are training enthusiasts at all, a degree of planning and training organization is important. But the way almost universally that I've seen periodization framed within climbing, I think is overly rigid and a poor extrapolation from other sports. And so I guess in that case, I don't find that it actually lines up very well with the needs of climbers. But we'll attach a couple of links underneath that I think will kind of help clarify the topic for people.
That's cute. I wish I could get it, but...
I think it's underrated in the sense of it doesn't have to be that complicated, and it could be a simple approach to get some variety into your training, whether that's allowing yourself to have a more macro view of like, hey, when the season is bad, I don't have to just be destroying myself still with climbing. It's okay to like have a different period of training where I'm not going as hard, allow my body to recover a little bit more, etc.
A little like general preparatory gym work.
Yeah. I like doing different exercises, and having some periodization with my training allows me to incorporate different exercises or different movements without having to obsess over, I want to do this, but I have to climb. It's like if you do them during different periods of your training, it can be really beneficial.
Yeah.
The next topic is the risk of hangboarding and campus boarding for youth climbers.
I don't feel qualified to speak on it.
Okay.
I don't know any youth research other than like epiphyseal like stress fractures are more likely to occur from campus boarding type movements.
Just because they're dynamic? Yep. So that I think is essentially the argument. The problem is that they're not going to be as dynamic as climbing. So if you're having people do hard boulders, then to some extent, certainly fingerboarding and probably campus boarding are preparatory. So if you cannot handle those, you should not be doing hard boulder problems.
I think the counter argument to that people make is that it just leads to too much because coaches don't know how to necessarily supply that.
But at the same time, like I think while that's a very reasonable and unfortunately probably realistic consideration, it kind of shifts the burden, which is like bad programming can hurt people.
Yeah.
You know, of course it can. But it's like you are likely to avoid injuries and be able to do harder things safely by building up a tolerance in advance. Fingerboard is about as safe as it could possibly be relative to those kind of like stressful interventions. And campus boarding, if done with competent instruction and as part of a moderately reasonably balanced plan, should be, if anything, educational and protective as far as teaching good motor patterns, as well as kind of like acclimating the body in a relatively controlled way to those forces, relative to the relatively uncontrolled and hard to assess intensity of bouldering itself. So if you think kids are able to jump around between holds and edges, they can definitely campus, but you should take some care in the amount of it that you program. And probably be responsible to watch them, right? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily like take a kid and be like, go smash around on that thing, 9-year-old, let's see what happens.
Double money.
I'm changing my answer, I'm convinced.
The next topic is progressive overload.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, wait, no. Underrated.
Oh, shit. Yes. Damn it.
I was like, wait, how are you saying overrated? I was going to be like, all right, take it away,
we're about to fight. I think most people who are actively training are probably pretty aware of it, but there are lots of climbers, even like pretty enthusiastic, sort of progress-oriented climbers who don't think about it specifically. And yeah, you're just not gonna get better without some form of progressive overload, whether it's accidental or intentional.
Yeah, I even see this a lot in the rehab world where I have to explain to patients that we want to increase weight, reps, sets of exercises to continually challenge the tissue. So it's definitely an underrated concept in actually improving, whether from a strength or injury recovery aspect.
Gaining muscle mass for climbing.
Ooh. Obviously, too much is not going to be doing anybody any favors, but it's remarkably hard to put on a ton of muscle mass, especially if you're not eating in a huge caloric surplus and doing exercises that are remotely suited to climbing. So I think probably people err a little too much on the side of always being as light as possible and not as much on developing sort of strength and muscle in advantageous ways.
Yeah, I agree. And I just tend to see oftentimes also people like afraid of putting on muscle mass, which can lead to, you know, obviously like a really bad pathway of being under calorically supplied, which then can cause you to like develop more injuries because you're not repairing your tissue as much, or you're just afraid of strength training to actually benefit your on the wall performance. So, but obviously like you can't gain too much mass or it will negatively affect your climbing. That's why like bodybuilders aren't professional rock climbers. So.
Yeah. But equally, you could probably talk to some bodybuilders and see how often they accidentally put on like 10 pounds of muscle, you know?
Accidentally all the time.
Yeah. I had 2 protein shakes and did a squat, and here we are.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt.
Following up that one, the next subject is losing weight for climbing.
Yeah.
Kind of a hot topic area, but I think people just go into it way too black and white. Like, while there are certainly people who have bad psychological relationships with food, diet is important for health for basically all humans, and for athletes in particular. I think that you are remiss in not considering it if you can.
I agree. It really depends on the individual. Just being respectful of your calorie intake, making it balanced so you can continue to perform and not get injured is really important. Could you improve your like strength to body weight ratio by being like a little more lean? Absolutely. But if you're in a calorie deficit all the time, is it going to negatively impact your performance? Absolutely.
Yeah, it turns out progressive overload does not apply to diet.
The next topic is muscle confusion in training.
For me, really, all you have to do is talk oddly to your muscles and they'll be confused. Because that's basically the same thing as muscle confusion. It doesn't really exist. It caught on as like a hot fitness topic by different trainers. Basically, you're just trying to prevent plateaus by changing exercises. But I often feel like those people are just failing to progress, and whether that's increasing sets, reps, or weight, or even just not actually pushing their body to those levels that need to be to progress the weights.
I think what happens is basically you see very fast like newbie gains as you acclimate to a new exercise. And so by constantly acclimating to a new exercise, you have this sense of constant and rapid progress. But in reality, you're just starting to like figure out what you're doing, and then you leave before any of the like more lasting improvements are made.
Maybe your brother told you?
Don't do it to me. I beg you. No.
You have nothing to do with this decision.
Next subject is leg/lower body training for climbing.
Oh, yeah. From my point of view, I see people get lots of injuries because they don't do any lower body training. But also, being someone who like has come into the sport with what I consider relatively weak hamstrings, I feel like that really impacted my performance because I sucked at heel hooks. I couldn't generate power through them. I couldn't pull myself up at all. They were kind of useless for me. And I'm only getting better at them by making my legs stronger and practicing them.
Yeah, I think that within reason, it's good to have strong legs for climbing. You don't obviously want that to be your like primary goal for most people, but at the same time, like stronger legs are great. And I think the thing that kind of flies under the radar with that is they frequently offer significant sort of proprioceptive benefits. Not only do you just sort of learn how to balance and control things better, you have a better sense of where your center of mass is over your feet, but it also brings attention to a variety of either movement pattern or like flexibility, mobility deficits.
Yeah, and I can't remark on how many times I see someone get into like a high foot position only to get stuck and not be able to get out. Yeah. And then just try and crank through their fingers to do it, where it's like a little leg strength would help.
Torque the F out of their leg.
Yeah, and then they get hurt. So
the next topic is stretching and flexibility for climbers.
Ooh. Yeah.
Climbers
seem to often not be super flexible. There are a whole bunch of reasons why you might want to be, from injury prevention to effective performance on the wall. I don't think that climbers need to be as bendy as some like extreme flexibility sports, but I think for very, very many climbers, it is a fairly high return, time efficient, often neglected area. And I think 10 to 30 minutes a few times a week will pay like huge dividends for most people.
So here's the problem. Flexibility training does not give you the same reward satisfactory as regular climbing or strength training, so it is so often ignored. Like, it takes a little bit longer to make some noticeable improvements, but the reality is it's so much harder to measure that people just quit.
Yeah.
Or they like take a week off and they feel like they went completely back with it, which you didn't. Your nervous system just temporarily forgot, like, but it will improve. And I agree with Dan, it's a very low risk thing that you can do to improve your climbing performance that just gets underutilized because it doesn't give us that same accomplishment feeling of like running or strength training or climbing and ascending. So definitely underrated.
Thanks so much to everyone who supports free science-based content on this channel by subscribing, buying t-shirts, purchasing gear through our affiliate links, and just generally sharing the psych. Until next time, train, climb, send, and repeat.